Because we're going to have a special business meeting of the members. And I also wanted to announce that in a couple of days, Lynn Malone will be 75 years old. 3/4 of a century. A blessing from God. All right, well, in your notes, hopefully everybody's in fellowship and looking at point 6 on page 6 of your notes. In his symbolic role as a shepherd, Zechariah's wages prefigured the price paid to betray Jesus, which set God's plan of salvation in motion through the suffering and sacrificial work of Christ, our good shepherd. Now we know that Isaiah, in continuity with some of the things that Zechariah said and other prophets, well, he had an announcement that he made. Isaiah 53, verses 3 through 11. Here talking about the person of Jesus Christ. A messianic passage, if you will. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he bore himself, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due. He said his grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his deaths. Should be plural there, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring. He will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many as he bears their iniquities. Obviously, a messianic psalm there about Jesus Christ in the future from Isaiah's time, several generations away. And of course, when he said, yet he was with a rich man in his death here, of course, we have the Hebrew word here in this particular passage is maweth. And of course, maweth in this particular passage is a plural form. And if I can just find it here real quick. There it is. You can see right there. It's a masculine plural construct with a third person masculine singular suffix. In his deaths. That is because he not only died physically, but he died spiritually for the sins of mankind. That's one of the things in one of the hymns that we sing. Twice he died and now is risen. Obviously, these people understood the doctrine better than the New American Standard translators. Anyway, moving on to chapter 12. When we look at the promises here, Jerusalem and its ultimate deliverance, it also describes the nation's ultimate judgment. and the mourning for the one whom they pierced. And of course, there's a spiritual cleansing of Jerusalem's residents. In chapter 12.1, the burden concerns Israel as the Lord prepares his his people for battle, when he will judge the nations that come against Judah and Jerusalem, and will cause severe injury to the enemy. And their armies will panic, and their horses will be blinded, confused, and bewildered. Going back to the book of Zechariah, chapter 12 rather. Chapter 12 and verses 1 through 4. It says, the burden of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Creative powers there emphasized. Behold, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples around. And when the siege is against Jerusalem, it will also be against Judah, the entire southern kingdom. Well, verse 3, it will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples, then all who lift it will be severely injured, and the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. Gathered against it. In that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with bewilderment, and his rider with madness, but I will watch over the house of Judah while I strike every horse of the people with blindness. Well, we don't have any incidents in past history that tell us about these things exactly like this, so we must assume that this lies in the future. The horses could be, of course, symbolic of military mobility. However, the scriptures, of course, are communicated to mankind in the time in which they live, so that people can understand these things. We understand, too, that when you talk about some of the armies that are in this region of the country, that there are some of them that do employ a large amount of horses for their soldiers. They have cavalries. Not all of them are into the mechanized warfare that most countries use these days. However, there are some. Well, the Lord promised to cause Jerusalem to be stirred up, to stir up the nations, to seriously harm the enemy while he protects his people and strikes the enemy armies. Well, point 3, at that future time, the leaders of Judah will mentally acknowledge the Lord's providence and love for his people in Jerusalem, which will strengthen them to defeat their enemies and keep Jerusalem safe and secure. Of course, we see this in verses 5 and 6. It says, then the clans of Judah will say in their hearts, a strong support for us are the inhabitants of Jerusalem through the Lord of hosts, their God. He said, in that day I will make the clans of Judah like a fire pot among pieces of wood, and a flaming torch among sheaves. So they will consume on the right hand and on the left all the surrounding peoples, while the inhabitants of Jerusalem again dwell on their own sites in Jerusalem. Obviously, these people will, the tribes, if you will, of the southern kingdom, the armies, are going to go up against these people. And whenever you think about this kind of stuff, I can remember years ago, whenever I was in elementary school living in western Pennsylvania, that my grandfather, he had a garden, and he would gather up all the old corn stalks, things like that, and pile them up in a big pile and set them on fire. And I'm here to tell you, they were dry, and they went up. Of course, he'd go out there and take a little kerosene or gasoline and put around the bottom of them to get them started good. Boy, they'd burn really good. They'd take off and just burn real quick. And there was other things in there and stuff like that. Years ago, I know you're not going to believe this, but my brother and I, we'd try and grab some of those old corn stalks and go out into the woods behind where he was burning them and smoke them. Yeah. That's how stupid we were. But anyway, God's going to Of course, this symbolic language shows that the people will defeat their enemies and keep Jerusalem safe. Well, point 4, the Lord promised to intervene, defend, protect, and invigorate his people for the future battle and to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And in verse 7 here, Zechariah recorded, the Lord also will save the tents of Judah first, so that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem will not be magnified above Judah. In that day the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the one who is feeble among them in that day will be like David. And the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord before them. And in that day I will set about to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. Obviously, God's got a plan to judge these nations in the future. Point 5, the Lord promised abundant spiritual blessings for his people in Jerusalem, and as recipients of grace, the Lord's people will offer supplications seeking reconciliation and redemption with him as they look on him whom they pierced. And in verse 10 here in Zechariah 12, we see, I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication, so that they will look on me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and they will weep bitterly over him like the bitter weeping over a firstborn. Well, point 6, as the realization sets in, all the people of Judah in that future day will experience a period of weeping and mourning. All the families of Israel will understand what happened when they rejected their Messiah at his first advent. Verses 11 through 14 here, in that day there will be a great mourning in Jerusalem, like the mourning of Hadad-rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. The land will mourn, every family by itself, the family of the house of David, it by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the house of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the house of Levi by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the Shemites by itself, and their wives by themselves, all the families that remain, every family by itself, and their wives by themselves. And of course, these are the families of royalty, the families of prophets. They're the families of the priesthood and those that assist the priests. Every family by itself and their wives by themselves. There'll be great mourning across the entire nation whenever they realize that they pierced their Messiah. Well, point 7, the great mourning of the Jews in that day will personally affect every single family living in Judah, as well as those living in Jerusalem. And I want to stop right there, and Wednesday we'll pick up at chapter 13 and finish this document off. And want to prepare for our special business meeting and a special presentation.